Hey everybody, it's Carter Froelich. And our mission at Launch Development Finance Advisors is to be a hero to the land development and home building community. We do that through a lot of different ways, but one of the ways that I want to give back to the industry is to be able to share our experience as well as the experience of a myriad of different players in our industry, their experience, what they've learned, what they're doing, and just the knowledge that they have to provide to the industry. With that having been said, I hope you enjoy this episode. And if there's anything that we can do at launch to help you finance infrastructure, reduce costs, mitigate risk, all with the goal of enhancing project profitability and returns, please give us a call at the contact information in the show notes.
Welcome to the Land to Lots podcast, powered by Launch Development Finance Advisors. And now your host, Carter Froelich.
Hello, everybody. It's Carter Froelich, and welcome to the Land to Lots podcast. And today we're going to California, and I have the great pleasure of welcoming to the program Kihm and Brian Rupp of Qtative. And Qtative is actually a member of the Land Advisors group of companies, as is Launch. And so I'm really excited to welcome Tim and Brian to the show because we're going to talk about California and California-focused entitlement issues and strategies. And for those of you that may not be familiar with Qtative, this is exactly what Qtative does. They help landowners, investors, developers, and builders go through the maze that is California entitlements. So with that as an introduction, Tim, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Carter. Great to be here.
Thank you, Carter.
And guys, I just touched a little bit on Qtative and what you do because it's clearly you're the Swiss Army knife of entitlements. And why don't you give Brian's goes, I don't know about the Swiss Army knife, but I think you are because you guys are so talented. What are some of how would you describe Qtative to a listener that may not be familiar with your organization?
Sure. Thanks, Carter. So Qtative Development Solutions it's a consulting firm, and we consult to builders, developers, school districts, public agencies. As we all know, entitlements, especially in California, are really complicated. So we'll come in during due diligence and help evaluate, the feasibility of a project, help lay out schedules, budgets, entitlement strategy. We'll, come up with the best team for the project in terms of architects, engineers, all the folks that we work with across the state. We'll manage that team through the design and entitlement process. And then after the approvals, and we handle all the hearings, we do the public outreach, the community meetings. And then after approvals, we run everything through permitting and even construction support so the project can get built.
Yeah. And your team comes from you've got such a deep bench from the land development, from the home building industry. So you have a lot of different capable individuals that can handle all of those different problems that you encounter as you go through the process. And one of the things I'd really like to talk about, there's a myriad of different things, but is the issue of how is it becoming easier, if I can use that term. I'm using it a little bit tongue in cheek as it relates to California, to streamline the entitlement process. And I understand that, the state keeps on going back, or the legislature, to pass additional legislation to amend, streamline some of the processes, the most complex of which is CEQA. We've recently had a couple of state housing legislative actions in AB 130 and SB 330 that we're going to talk about. But so prefacing our listener as to what and why we're going to be talking about these issues. But before we get into those specific issues, Could you just give us a little bit of background on you individually, Tim and Brian, before we jump into that, just to show the qualifications and why you're the right people to talk about these issues?
Okay, sure. I'll start and then kick it over to Brian. So my background is I worked on the consulting side for a large planning, engineering, environmental firm, the Keith Companies, which is now Stantec.
Mhm.
And so I was there for about 18 years, and that's where Brian and I met. And he was on the engineering side. And then I shifted after 18 years to the development side, and I ran entitlement and development for about 12 years for a very large firm that worked across the Western US. And then about 8 years ago, created TK Consulting
Mhm.
to do the services I mentioned earlier and kind of manage that whole entitlement process for builders and developers and agencies. And then we partnered with Qtative, and Qtative has an even broader kind of mix of what they do. So that gave us a lot more resources. Now we're a group of 10 people just in my team, merging now with the Qtative folks. So that kind of doubles that team. And most of our team has 35 plus years experience. And almost our entire team has been on the building and development side for a long period of time.
Thanks for having us. Thrilled to be here and appreciate the opportunity to join you on your podcast. So I started my career on the East Coast, and I started my career much like Tim in consulting. I was a civil and environmental engineering consultant, but with a heavy focus on land development projects.
Mhm.
And so my clients were buying land to develop for residential mixed use properties, what have you. And they would come to me and they say, Brian, I'm going to buy this property. Can you come out and take a look at it with me? I'd really like to understand what we can do. We have this little pocket of wetlands on the one side, and I was just so intrigued. I was thrilled with what they were doing. And so I took that moment early in my career to pivot into land development. And when my family and I moved to California 25 years ago, I did exactly that, pivoted into land development. And I started in the consulting world with Tim. We worked together on several large master plan community projects, mostly residential projects. And then for the past 20 years, I was the executive vice president of a local real estate investment and development firm based out of Orange County. And the focus there was primarily residential, California based, although we did do work in other states, but it was largely California centric. That gave me a really good opportunity from an ownership position to see how you buy property, how you capitalize the project, how you worked with both private investors, institutional equity, and what they're looking for, and then leading the charge and navigating the entitlements to create value. And that's really what it's all about, is adding value to the underlying land through these development approvals.
And that's a great segue, Brian, because we're going to eventually get into the legislation, but let's start even more basic than that. So California is known for its very bureaucratic, time-consuming, if I can use the word, painful entitlement process, where it can take multiple years that is worked into the pro formas to get the entitlements. So when a client comes to you, and whoever wants to take the question, feel free. But what are the how are you consulting them as it relates to what are the most important entitlements we need to get to de-risk this transaction to create that value? And what are the entitlements that you're continually watching to make sure that you're keeping the project on track and so that we can hit that 4 to 5 year time frame?
All right. Well, I'll take the first crack at it, and then Tim can jump in. But I mentioned California, and I think our focus with Qtative is on California. We do business. We've all done business in other states, but California is one of the most difficult states to do business in if you're a land developer or a builder. And but that is the opportunity. And that's where we add value. If you do what we do in Arizona, Texas, you're not adding as much value to the land. So this is the opportunity. And we've been doing it for decades. Our team collectively has been doing this for over 30 years individually and collectively for decades. So we know how to navigate that process. And I feel part of our job is to de-risk the deal for the landowners, the investors. So how do we do that? One, it starts with comprehensive due diligence. So when we get involved in a project, we like to conduct thorough due diligence, not only assessing the availability of utilities and the feasibility of physically building the project, but what's the political climate like? What is the city council like? What's the community sentiment? And a lot of that will then fold into the entitlement strategy that we outline for the project. And whether it's a zone change, a general plan amendment, or a simple tentative tract map to subdivide the property, we want to look at those risks and how do we best mitigate them. And then, I think at the forefront, you mentioned CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act.
Yep.
And that has been, I think, the primary risk for landowners in California, because there's so much uncertainty in the timing. While you might be able to get through the core entitlements in 2 years, if you get a CEQA challenge by a labor group or an environmental group, that can add 3+ years to your timeline. The good news is the courts are being favorable in those decisions, but time kills all deals. And so mitigating the likelihood of a CEQA challenge is a big part of what we do. And we'll talk about the legislation and how that's helping us.
One of the things we've been doing a lot lately that we feel like's been real helpful for our clients is we team up with Lakebridge, another one of the Land Advisors affiliates, and they've got a great group, them and some of the other folks in Land Advisors, and we pull together some kind of highest and best use analysis, help decide, hey, what will help this deal to net the highest residual value at the end of the day, so that right up front when we're doing the planning and determining what product's going to be on this land, we can pick the right product. And that could be, what's the market going to bear, who'll pay the most for this. But it also might be, hey, are there fire considerations? Does the product have to be a certain thing to keep the insurance down, since that's a big cost these days? It's been hitting us the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to that, we're working a lot on the resource agency permits, Army Corps, Coastal, CDFW, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and then coastal commissions, a big thing in California.
Yeah.
And people look at coastal commission, they're like, forget it, I'm not going to pursue this project. But we've had some real great successes with them, and just working through issues where at the beginning of the project, there's like, there's no way we're ever going to support this project.
Yeah.
You work through the issues, and then the next thing they're like, okay, well, if we could do this and this, and then we work through those issues, and next thing you know, staff's recommending approval and we get the project approved.
Yeah.
And Brian and I and others on the team have had some pretty big coastal commission successes. And then community opposition is daunting.
Yeah.
And the first community opposition meeting or community meeting we go into, it's like pitchforks and people yelling, and you're like, should we have had security here? But lo and behold, by meeting, we had one recently where that was the case. And by the second meeting, we came back and we said, hey, here's all your issues. Here's how we're addressing them. We can't do everything, but here's what we can do. And they clapped at the end. And I was just like astounded. And we had some more ups and downs, but in the end, the local community is who showed up to support the project.
Yeah.
So it was a win-win, I think.
Huge win. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit, but what you said is, because we're all working on some projects collaboratively together, the financing, entitlement, land residual, and value engineering. So to be able to use also Clarity and Pete Reeb to come in, hey, what does the market want? What product should we be using? Scott to come in, Emery, and go, I think we can reduce our grading budget by doing some of these other things. Pretty soon, all of that really creates value in and of itself by looking at these projects, differently maybe than what our clients have looked at them previously. So that's huge. But some of our listeners, either they're new in California, just getting into the industry, or they may be outside of the state of California. I just want to talk a little bit about CEQA, what that did, just Reader's Digest, what that is and what it requires, and then maybe just touch on briefly what has to happen with the Coastal Commission, just to give our listeners a little bit of background in those two agencies. Does any care to jump on
Yeah,
that?
let me jump in on just a little bit of background on CEQA. I mean, we throw these acronyms around because we use them every day.
Mhm.
So I think for context, the CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, is introduced 50 years ago. And it was really introduced as a way to have large infrastructure projects have some sort of environmental review and oversight to create some transparency. And it was really meant for large public projects. And over the past 50 years, the bar has continually got set higher and higher and higher. And it ultimately started to become a tool for project opponents. Environmentalists were kind of the forefront of that, and they were using as a tool to stop projects with really no basis. And unfortunately, while the courts have ruled favorably on the vast majority of at least the CEQA challenges that I've been involved with, the legislation did not catch up.
Yeah.
So really what happened is you had archaic legislation where anyone could file a CEQA challenge to a development project with little to no basis or facts. And so, and one of the key issues there is that if a group challenges a project with a CEQA appeal and they lose, they don't have to pay the attorney's fees for the developer. The developer gets stuck paying all the costs. And the developer is carrying interest and pref and an enormous amount of costs. So it's been a very difficult thing for developers to deal with. But some of the legislation that's recently been introduced is really the first. So in 2025, after 50 years, really that's the first form of CEQA reform that we've seen. So that's a great bright spot and a good opportunity.
Yep. No, thanks for that, Brian. And then Tim, if you just want to since you brought up the Coastal Commission, you just want to give a primer on that, and then we'll jump
Sure.
into some of the legislative changes.
I can be brief, and I think California Coastal Commission actually took a similar path to what Brian just described with CEQA, where initially it had a scope of protecting the coastline and providing better public access so that the beaches weren't all private and that kind of thing. And then that scope expanded to where they actually have a reach that's much broader, and it goes pretty far inland in many cases.
Yeah.
So there's Chapter 3 of the Coastal Act is typically what we focus on, and it's providing public access and all the ways that they define that. And it can even be like, okay, I've got a hotel near the coast, and public access means that anybody at any income level can afford to stay at the hotel. And so they may require hotels, even campgrounds we've worked on, to have affordable units like walk-in, bike-in campsites.
Yeah.
And various things like that. So it takes a while to work through that, and that's what we do.
And so I think that really starts setting the table for our listeners to understand the challenges that can occur in California. So 50 years ago, CEQA, we've got the Coastal Commission, there's everybody else that has got an opinion on projects. It's very challenging. Over the years, the legislature and the government has tried to or attempted to pass legislation to streamline the process, to bring more supply, if I can use that term, to the market. However, it seems like a lot of the legislation that was done previously had strings attached. Could either of you just talk about some of the changes that California has attempted to make, and then we'll get into the recent law changes, what they are, and then what the opportunities are for the industry?
Yeah, Carter, you're exactly right. I would say with Governor Newsom coming in to Sacramento several years ago, the legislation really introduced several pieces of new housing legislation that was quote unquote pro housing. Just really, like you described, it came with a lot of heavy baggage or strings attached. And so it made it impractical to use those pieces of legislation. Just a few examples: AB 2011, which was introduced in 2022, it allowed by right approval of projects that are zoned commercial to be residential without a zone change. You thought, wow, this is wonderful. This is like, we've been waiting for this all of our careers.
Yeah.
But then you read the legislation like, oh, well, you have to include affordable housing and you have to use prevailing wage. And you're like, well, now my project doesn't pencil.
Yeah.
And then, there's another piece that was interesting because we've seen a number of churches. They have large properties and they're often moving into new areas. So SB4 allowed faith-based institutions, churches, and other nonprofits, colleges to build multifamily housing by right. And however, it limited it to 50 homes. And you had to incorporate apprenticeships into the construction workers, and just had all these, limitations on it. So someone can build a small project, great. That really doesn't move the needle in our industry when we have 3.5 million units of a housing shortage across the country.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I guess what we were able to do and successfully do is use the threat of some of these new legislations. While we didn't apply them directly to our project, we could say to the city council, here's what could happen. We have a different project. We have a much less dense project. We have single family homes or a mix of affordable and for sale homes. Here's what we can do with our project if you approve it. If you don't, what if the next developer that comes into town uses this new legislation and crams it down your throat and puts 700 units on your property?
Yeah.
So the threat of it was a good stick, if you will, and gave some political cover to the councils and planning commissioners who had to approve those projects.
Yeah. And how about SB 330, which has been one of the most widely used piece of legislation? We're getting into that. Tim, do you have, would you like to explain that and why it's widely used?
Sure. Yeah. And in some of the legislation that Brian referenced, you know it's not working because it's not used that often. But SB 330 is by far the most effective tool that we've seen, and it's being implemented everywhere, in a broad way. And basically, what that does is, for you to be eligible, so any legislation you look at, the first thing you do is you kind of say, hey, am I eligible to even consider this? And so for that, you have to be consistent. For SB 330, you have to be consistent with either general plan or zoning. At one point, it was both. And then, as they keep updating legislation, it was like, hey, cities, counties should be consistent with their general plan and zoning. If they're not, that's not your fault. That's not your problem. And so if you have a general plan density at one number and zoning at a different, you can go with the higher number, for example. And the agency can't make you do a zone change just because the zoning is not consistent with the general plan. So it gives you a lot. And then so you find that consistency, and then there's a bunch of factors and benefits that you have. So it provides streamlining. SB 330 is part of the Housing Accountability Act, and you're supposed to be able to get through projects more quickly. One of the ways it does that is it says, hey, the maximum number of public hearings you can have is 5.
Yeah.
I've been on projects that have had 3 or 4 just design review committees before you even get to planning commission or city council. So, that it makes that more reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the biggest items on SB 330 is an agency can't deny your project as long as you're consistent with general plan and you're consistent with the objective design standards. You don't even have to be consistent with all their policies if they're more subjective.
Mm-hmm.
The city can't come and say, we don't really like the look of that. We kind of like to see a little of this or that. Like, well, if that's not an objective standard, you can't deny us based on that. It only has to be, the only way they can deny it is if you're not consistent with the objective standards or you pose a significant, life safety type issue. Yeah. Other than that, you go in front of, and you work with staff, and they work, and city attorney will work with planning commission and city council and let them know, hey, this is an SB 330 project. You can't deny this project unless you can truly make, a finding that it's a life and, life safety type issue.
And so that's great. And SB 330 is now out. It codifies a lot of the rules and what can be done, what can't be done. How have the cities been able, how are they to work with? Are they knowledgeable of what this process is, and who is directing them and showing them on related to how a project you're working on qualifies under SB 330? Is it you? Is it the attorneys? Is it all of the above? Yeah. What is the experience in with SB 330 in the trenches every day, all the different jurisdictions that you're working in California?
Yeah, it's really evolved, Carter. So in the beginning, nobody knew. They heard about it, didn't really know much about it. We didn't either, and so we were working with, a lot of great land use attorneys that, they were figuring it out too, but some of those groups we work with actually helped write that legislation.
Yeah.
And so we kind of worked with those guys, and we would help not only our clients, but the agencies understand it. And what we found is at this point today, a lot of public agencies have embraced it. They support it because they were seeing a lot of really great projects, really well-designed projects that people in the community would fight. It didn't matter how great the project was, they would fight it anyway. And so then they would have this pressure to deny the project, even though planning commission and city council might love it. They felt like, they couldn't approve it. So now this gives them the support and they can't deny it. So a lot of them have really appreciated that.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of misinformation though. And so almost every time we start working with an agency, there's some parts where we have to help educate them. We'll team with an attorney to help sometimes write a letter that says, hey, here's how SB 330 works, right, or here's how this other piece of legislation works. Here's how, it applies to this project. Here's what you as an agency have to agree with or determine. And then that goes to the city attorney and it kind of gives them the support they need.
Yeah. So a lot of it sounds like, and here again, you guys are in this. I just have my own little thing to do, which is financing, which is a lot easier than very few people are sticking around long enough with the pitchforks, to talk about tax exempt bond financing. But to some degree, this is a relief for the electeds because it's giving them cover.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we've been successful in educating city staff on the majority of the projects we're working on, Carter. We've had many situations where city staff, we submit a SB 330 pre-app or an application, and they come back and say, oh, you need a zone change. You need a general plan amendment. And we have to go back to them and say, no, we don't. We have general plan land use. We don't need to go through a zone change. And by the way, we can use state density bonus law to get waivers, concessions, et cetera, to allow this development as planned. And I think by and large, we've been successful in convincing city staff with our team.
Yeah.
We do that also we'll bring in land use counsel when needed. And land use counsel can come in, work with the city attorney's office, because staff sometimes doesn't want to stick their neck out to make the decision. So they're going to look to the city attorney and say, hey, do we, is this right? And their city staff, quite frankly, isn't set up to read and interpret legislation. So it can get pretty fuzzy pretty quick.
Yeah.
So we'll work with land use counsel, and sometimes land use counsel hits a brick wall with the city attorney. And in that case, what you do is you go to California HCD and Housing and Community Development, and they get their attorneys involved, and they'll write a letter, and they've issued decisions. So there is a process.
Yeah.
To get through that, where if you're solid on your basis, you can really take full effect of this. The cities can't deny you.
Yeah. So do you feel that SB 330 has given you a more firm footing and a little bit more certainty as it relates to moving forward in your experience to date?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's really been, I'd say, over the past 5 years, it's been the key to unlocking a lot of new developments, particularly infill developments. It's been a huge win for them.
Yeah. And staying on SB 330, how can builders use some of these vesting rights, et cetera? And I don't know if we talked about it, but I think there's a 5-year housing cap. Is that all right? To box in timelines to ensure that we're going to be able to reduce our entitlement costs and a lot of our risk. And if I jumped ahead a little bit, and feel free to dig into the details on those issues.
Yeah, so SB 330 creates a 5 hearing cap, which is what Tim was talking about, where the project is limited to 5 public hearings. So if you go back, city council is one, planning commission is another, design review board is another. And if they make you go to the economic development commission, that could be another. So what it really does, the intention there and the practicality of it is you're not stuck doing 3 planning commission hearings, 3 design review board, and 2 city council hearings. And so it limits the ability for a city to drag a project out.
Yeah.
And that's really the big help there. But I think one of the big things that we like to tell our clients is, particularly in a city, if they're looking to enact new ordinances, new development standards, get your SB 330 pre-application in, because the city has 30 days to accept that application. And once you're accepted, you're vested.
Yeah, you're vested.
And that's your ticket.
And I think that was the thing I wanted to get across, and I misspoke. I think I said 5 years rather than 5 years. So,
5 hearing cap.
Yeah. But in California, it could be 5 years. Yeah, it's not unreasonable. So I misspoke. So the key as it relates to SB 330 is get that preliminary application in ASAP to protect yourself from future changes.
That's right.
Got it.
Right. Let me show my shade here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing, Carter, on that is once you submit that application, like they don't even deem it complete. That's not a requirement. They accept it. You submit a kind of a review fee. And then unless it's incomplete, it's just deemed accepted, as Brian referenced. And at that point, if any new ordinances are adopted, you're not
Yeah.
subject to those.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, and we do these applications all the time. And you can make changes to the plan, you can make changes to the density, all that stuff, but that still applies. And then it gives them time frames through the process.
Yeah.
So we have a period of time to submit our full development app. Then the agency has 30 days to review and respond. So and if they don't, then you're automatically deemed complete.
Yeah.
Some of those things can be really helpful.
Well, that wraps up episode 1 of my conversation with Tim Kihm and Brian Rupp. Stay tuned for episode 2.
You have been listening to the Land to Lots podcast with Carter Froelich. Follow us wherever you find your podcast to never miss a new episode.